We're a dumping ground. We're like a garbage can for the world. That's what's happened. That's what's happened to our. We're like a garbage can. You know, it's the first time I've ever said that. And every time I come up and talk about what they've done to our country, I get angrier and angrier. First time I've ever said garbage can, but you know what? It's a very accurate description.
It's hard to look at that and what we just saw from Kamala Harris, Salamesha, as she has been trying to draw a contrast between the two campaigns and not look at the first Black and South Asian woman who is the nominee of the party, of a major party for president of the United States, and the daughter of a woman who came alone at age 19 from India here, largely raised her two daughters alone, and ended up with a PhD from Berkeley, and contrast that. So I wonder what you see when you hear what Kamala Harris has to say about Donald Trump and his demeaning language toward people who have come here from other countries.
Thank you for having me. I mean, it's pretty astonishing. And I think one of the things that's really troubling is the fact that Donald Trump is a child of an immigrant, his mother. Kamala Harris is a child of two immigrants in terms of her father and her mother from India and Jamaica. And I, too, am a child of an immigrant from Trinidad. So to think of America, all of us are benefiting from people who travel to this country to make a better world and a better life for themselves is deeply disturbing because, we all have different visions of what America can be. But you hear in these final days of the election, two very different versions and visions of America's past and its future. And so that's why Kamala Harris's vision of democracy and her very expansive notion of freedom is really important. And I just want to say that this idea of reproductive justice being somehow separate from the economy is also a kind of false binary. Reproductive rights and reproductive freedoms for women control so much of how we exist in the world in terms of, family leave or the budgets in our family. So there are ways in which this idea that if you focus on reproductive justice is somehow not to focus on the economy. I just think that is a false binary, and it also just has proven not to be true at all.
And we know that the lack of health care and the lack of access to health care definitely affects women of color, affects people who are not as economically sound as some others, disproportionately. So, Basil, I wonder, when you look at these contrasts and you look at where we are 11 days out, what's going to resonate with that small sliver that we keep talking about of people who will ultimately decide this election?
Well, I tell you, one of the things that I have to say is that resonates with me right in this moment is seeing that Donald Trump at an official campaign event has the words "deport illegals now, end migrant crime" splattered on a step and repeat at an official campaign event standing behind him. And even worse, that there's a person standing next to him in uniform, because that sends the message that he is going to take his rhetoric, and the people that support him will take that rhetoric and enforce it with people in and out of uniform somewhere in this country. And that should concern everybody, because he has not joked about, he has talked about using the military and law enforcement in ways not meant to be used, but for his own purpose. And that image with that backdrop and that individual standing there completely reinforces that for me. So having said that, I'll answer the other part of your question, which is, look, Kamala Harris is doing two things right now. She's in persuasion and she's in GOTV.
Yeah.
And if you listen to her, she has gotten so much better on this campaign trail, because just the ability to go talk to voters and meet with voters, and the polling is showing that in those conversations, they are trusting her more than they are Donald Trump on her policy positions. And all of those are really extraordinary signs for her, for Democrats, because that contrast is showing through over and over and over again in every stop that she's making. So when you hear his rhetoric, and mind you, from a policy perspective, he's kind of said the same thing since 2016, but the language...
And my producer is telling me in my ear that he's saying exactly what you would expect him to be saying right now with that backdrop.
Exactly right. The language and the tone of it has gotten extraordinarily worse, and the guardrails that were on him, such as they were, are gone because those people are gone. Those campaign staffers are gone. The government folks that were around him when he was in office are gone and actually campaigning against him. And so what we look forward to if he were to become president of the United States is the loss of those guardrails. And what Kamala Harris is saying is that we are a better country than this. We actually can solve all of the concerns that you have through policy means. And this polling is showing that the voters are actually believing her on it.
And Jeremy, Colin Allred, let's go back to the idea that there is also another race going on in Texas that doesn't involve presidential candidates. Colin Allred is going to be with Kamala Harris in Houston tonight. NBC News just learned that a Democratic super PAC is spending $5 million on TV ads across the state. And I want to play one of them that focuses on abortion.
As an emergency physician, I can tell you Texas women are in danger because of Ted Cruz. I've seen 12, 13-year-old survivors of rape come in pregnant women with severe complications, threatening their health. And Ted Cruz's abortion ban makes it illegal for me to provide them care. I could never vote for Ted Cruz. Colin Allred will restore a woman's right to make her own medical decisions.
So, Jeremy, we know the impact that this is already having on the presidential race, but will it have an impact on the Texas Senate race?
Yeah, absolutely it will. You know, look, the Senate race was really close the last time around. Ted Cruz won his reelection last time, but only by 2.6 percentage points in 2018. What's the problem for him is that we've added over 3 million voters since that time to the voter rolls. That's a lot of independents out there. These messages that are going out now from the Colin Allred campaign is aimed at trying to get those suburban independents out to vote for him. And so he sees the play there to try to get them on his side because they know Ted Cruz's numbers with independents particularly is really bad right now. And that's his opportunity to kind of seize that middle. And that could have an additional effect on the presidential race as well.
Salamisha, Basil just mentioned GOTV, and that is the major part of the game right now. How do you get your voters to the polls? And we saw last night the number of celebrities that came out in support of Kamala Harris. Tonight, the word is Beyonce is going to be performing. But I want to talk about Tyler Perry last night because he, of course, built an empire on entertainment. But he turned serious when talking about Donald Trump. So take a listen.
I watched him from the Central Park 5 to Project 2025. And what I realized is that in this Donald Trump America, there is no dream that looks like me. And it was so important for me to stand with a candidate who understands that we as America, we are equipped. And I could never stand with a candidate who wants America to be a sheet.
We are a quilt. What is the power of a message like that?
Well, I think, Tyler Perry is both speaking to, I guess, this larger fabric of American democracy, but also speaking specifically there, I think, to African-American male voters who may be courted by the Trump campaign. But what Tyler Perry is actually saying is that the vision that Kamala Harris is putting forth includes you and is not actually racist, right? To go from Central Park 5 to Project 25, that's like a long lineage of really problematic racial categorizations and racist rhetoric. So I would like to say, though, too, what is exciting, I think, of tonight with Beyonce and Bruce Springsteen is that what we're seeing in these final days of the election are we have to believe what these candidates are saying. And so by having these musical performers, you have Willie Nelson and Beyonce allegedly coming to the stage tonight. In collaboration, perhaps, but also showing this intergenerational, multiracial, cross-gendered, multi-gendered coalition that I think what Kamala Harris has done really effectively is say reproductive justice is not just a women's issue, but this is an issue that affects American families and American people. So what does it mean to have Willie Nelson at a reproductive justice rally on behalf of Americans and speaking about freedom? What does it mean to have Beyonce with Willie Nelson? And he was also on her album. So we can think about their musical collaboration as really coalition building. And we see that Kamala Harris has, with all of the number of Republicans that have come forward in support of her, with Liz Cheney and her doing, going around talking, and they speak very differently about this issue of reproductive justice. They're on opposite sides, but that their big belief of what democracy is and what American freedom should be is something that bonds them. So I just think that the musical artist, whether it's Bruce Springsteen, whether it's Willie Nelson or Beyonce, and then now also entertainers like Tyler Perry and directors like Tyler Perry. It's speaking to the broad-based coalition that I think underscores her vision of freedom that she keeps on saying that she's trying to preserve and even push forward.
Motivating for the base, potentially, Basil, but there's also, Instagram, YouTube, all the social media. And I mean, let's not kid ourselves, with Beyonce and Taylor Swift, Kamala Harris then add Bruce Springsteen, but three of the most famous and most successful entertainers, musicians on the planet. But how does that translate to votes?
I got to tell you, last night I was at a town hall sponsored by a Black sorority, Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated, and one of the best moments for me in this cycle, a young 18-year-old who was there because his mother took him to this town hall, came up to me afterwards and said, I had no intention of voting before this, but you all convinced me that it was important. And why? Because we talked about the history of a time when he could not vote or he was not able to vote. And a lot of people in that room may not have been able to cast their ballot without extraordinary difficulty, and talking about what's at stake. And ultimately, no matter what you're looking at on social media, it takes someone you know to be able to go to you and say, I need you to do this because this is what's at stake. And just more of us need to do that. And, the fact that Kamala Harris is doing all these rallies is because it puts a lot of people in the room at the same time to give them the energy and the talking points to go out and do exactly what I just did.